What happens when the most controversial radio host in America comes face to face with one of the most polarizing royals of our time? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry steps into Howard Stern's studio, thinking he can control the narrative like he's done with every other softball interview. But this isn't Oprah's couch, and Howard Stern doesn't play by royal rules. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe the explosive confrontation that erupted live on air last night. The tension was palpable from the moment Prince Harry walked into the Sirius XM studios. Word backstage was that Harry had specifically requested certain topics be off limits, something that immediately set Howard's teeth on edge. Anyone who knows Stern knows he doesn't take kindly to celebrities trying to dictate the terms of his show. The Duke of Sussex arrived with his usual entourage of handlers, each one armed with clipboards and stern expressions, as if they were entering enemy territory rather than a radio studio. Howard started the interview with his trademark casual demeanor, leaning back in his chair with that knowing smirk that has made him millions of enemies and even more fans over the decades. "So, Harry," he began, his voice carrying that familiar New York edge, "you're here promoting your new Netflix documentary series. But I got to ask, don't you think the American public is getting a little tired of the whole, poor me, I was born into unimaginable wealth and privilege routine?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Harry's media-trained smile faltered for just a microsecond before he recovered, but Howard caught it. He always catches it. "Well, Howard," Harry replied, his British accent seeming to thicken slightly under pressure, "I think there's a difference between sharing one's authentic experience and complaining. Mental health is something that affects everyone regardless of their circumstances." "Mental health, right?" Howard nodded, but his tone was already shifting into that dangerous territory his longtime listeners know all too well. "But let's be real here, Harry. You've made millions talking about how tough your life was. You had a Netflix deal worth what? $100 million. You wrote a best-selling book. You're doing podcasts, documentaries, interviews. At what point does sharing your truth become a really lucrative business model?" The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. Harry's handlers exchanged worried glances, and you could practically see them calculating whether they should intervene. But Harry, to his credit or detriment, decided to engage. "I think that's quite a cynical way of looking at it. Howard, when someone shares their story of trauma and healing, it helps others who might be going through similar experiences." "Trauma," Howard repeated, drawing out the word like he was tasting something bitter. "You know what trauma is, Harry? Trauma is growing up in the South Bronx with a crackhead mother and no father. Trauma is working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your family's head. Trauma is not having your chef prepare the wrong breakfast at your private estate." The atmosphere in the studio shifted dramatically. Howard's producer, Robin Quivers, who had been relatively quiet up to this point, let out a barely audible, "Oh boy," sensing what was coming. Harry's jaw visibly tightened, and for the first time since entering the studio, his carefully constructed media persona began to crack. "That's incredibly dismissive," Harry shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Just because someone has financial security doesn't mean they can't experience genuine psychological trauma. The death of my mother, the constant media harassment, the institutional racism my wife faced." "Oh, here we go with the racism card again," Howard interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locking onto Harry's with predatory intensity. "You know what I find interesting, Harry? Every time you or Meghan face any kind of criticism, it's automatically racism. Bad press, racism. People questioning your actions, racism. The fact that maybe, just maybe, some people think you're a couple of entitled brats who bite the hand that fed them must be racism." The color drained from Harry's face, but Howard wasn't finished. He was just getting warmed up. And anyone familiar with his style knew that when Howard Stern smells blood in the water, he becomes relentless. "And another thing," he continued, his voice gaining momentum, "this whole narrative about protecting your family's privacy while simultaneously putting your entire life on Netflix, writing tell-all books, and doing interviews with anyone who'll pay you enough money. Don't you see the hypocrisy there?" Harry's media training was clearly being put to the ultimate test. You could see him trying to formulate a response that would diffuse the situation while still defending himself. But Howard had put him in an impossible position. "We share our story on our terms," Harry finally managed, "to combat the lies and misinformation that have been spread about us for years." "Your terms?" Howard laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Right. Because God forbid anyone else gets to have an opinion about the guy who turned his back on his family, moved to California, and now makes a living trashing the very institution that gave him his title and his relevance. Tell me, Harry, if you hate being a royal so much, why don't you just give up the title? Why do you still call yourself the Duke of Sussex? If you want nothing to do with the monarchy. The question hit its mark. Harry's carefully maintained composure began to crumble, and you could see genuine anger flashing in his eyes. His handlers were now actively trying to catch his attention, probably signaling for him to either change the subject or wrap up the interview entirely. But Harry, perhaps driven by years of pent-up frustration from softball interviews where he was treated with kid gloves, decided to fight back. "You know what, Howard?" Harry said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I came here thinking we could have an intelligent conversation about important issues. But clearly, you're more interested in cheap shots and tabloid-level gossip than actually discussing anything meaningful." Howard's eyebrows shot up, and a dangerous smile spread across his face. The king of all media had just been challenged on his own show, in his own studio, by someone who clearly didn't understand the fundamental rule of appearing on the Howard Stern show. Howard always wins. The tension in the room ratcheted up to an almost unbearable level as everyone present realized they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. "Oh, I see," Howard said, his voice becoming deceptively calm. "So now I'm the bad guy for asking you actual questions instead of kissing your ass like Oprah and all the other sycophants you usually talk to. Here's a thought. You're a royal highness. Maybe if you can't handle being challenged, you shouldn't be doing interviews at all." But what Howard said next would push Prince Harry completely over the edge, setting up a confrontation that neither man would walk away from unchanged. Howard leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who had spent decades perfecting the art of psychological warfare through radio waves. His next words came out with surgical precision, designed to hit exactly where it would hurt most. "You know what I think this is really about, Harry? I think you're jealous. Jealous that your brother gets to be king while you're stuck making Netflix documentaries and begging for relevance in Hollywood. All this mental health and protecting my family nonsense is just cover for the fact that you're the spare who couldn't handle being second fiddle." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. His face flushed red, and for a moment the veneer of royal composure completely evaporated. Robin Quivers audibly gasped, knowing that Howard had just crossed a line that even he rarely crossed. The studio fell into dead silence. The kind of silence that precedes an explosion. "How dare you?" Harry whispered, his voice barely controlled. Then louder. "How dare you reduce everything I've been through to jealousy? You have no idea what it's like to lose a parent the way I did. To have that trauma exploited by the press for decades. To watch your wife be systematically destroyed by the same machine that killed your mother." But Howard wasn't backing down. If anything, Harry's emotional response only energized him further. "Oh, spare me the melodrama," he shot back. "Your mother died in a car accident 26 years ago. At some point, don't you think it's time to stop using that as an excuse for every bad decision you make? And as for Meghan being systematically destroyed, she's a millionaire living in a mansion in Montecito. If that's destruction, sign me up." Harry's hands were visibly shaking now, his media training completely abandoned. "She was suicidal, Howard. My wife was driven to the point where she wanted to take her own life because of the treatment she received. And you're sitting here making jokes about it like it's some kind of game. Suicidal." Howard repeated, his tone shifting to something even more dangerous. "Let me ask you something, Harry. If Meghan was really in such a dark place, why didn't you just leave quietly? Why did you have to make a whole production out of it? Why the Oprah interview? Why the Netflix series? Why the book deals? If someone I loved was truly suffering, I'd get them help and get them out of the situation. I wouldn't turn their pain into a media empire." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Harry's breathing became visibly labored, and his handlers were now frantically trying to signal to him, probably suggesting he end the interview immediately. But Harry was beyond rational thought now, consumed by a rage that had been building for years. "You're sick," Harry said, his voice filled with genuine disgust. "You're actually sick. Do you get off on this? Tearing people down for entertainment, making light of mental health struggles? No wonder your own relationships have been such disasters. Who could love someone so fundamentally cruel?" The personal attack on Howard's relationships was a tactical error of monumental proportions. Howard's expression changed completely, his predatory smile vanishing and being replaced by something much colder and more dangerous. The studio atmosphere became electric with tension, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would have consequences far beyond this single interview. "Oh, now we're getting personal." Howard's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Okay, let's get personal. Your Royal Highness, let's talk about how you abandoned your family when they needed you most. Your grandfather was dying, and where were you? Making deals in Hollywood. Your grandmother who gave you everything, who protected you your entire life, and you couldn't even be bothered to show up for her final years because you were too busy playing victim in California." Harry shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Don't you dare talk about my grandmother. Don't you dare bring her into your sick little game." "Sit down," Howard commanded. But his voice had lost none of its authority, despite Harry's obvious agitation. "We're not done here. You came on my show. You play by my rules, and my rules say we don't stop until we get to the truth." "The truth?" Harry laughed bitterly, but remained standing. "You wouldn't know the truth if it bit you in the ass. The truth is that you're a bitter old man who makes a living destroying people because your own life is so empty and pathetic that the only way you can feel powerful is by tearing others down." Howard stood up as well, matching Harry's aggressive posture. Despite being older, Howard's presence filled the room in a way that reminded everyone why he had dominated radio for decades. "The truth is that you're a spoiled brat who's never worked a real day in his life, who threw away everything he was given because he couldn't handle not being the center of attention. The truth is that you've turned your family's private pain into a public spectacle because you're too weak and too selfish to handle your problems like a man." "Weak?" Harry's voice cracked with emotion. "I served my country in Afghanistan while you were sitting in your comfortable studio making prank phone calls. I've dedicated my life to helping veterans, to mental health advocacy, to making a real difference in the world. What have you ever done besides mock people's pain for ratings?" "I've entertained millions of people for 40 years, Howard shot back. "I've built an empire by being honest about who I am and what I think. I don't hide behind charity work and victim narratives to avoid taking responsibility for my choices. And I sure as hell don't bite the hand that fed me and then cry about it when people call me out." The confrontation had reached a fever pitch with both men now facing off across the studio like fighters in a ring. Harry's security detail was clearly uncomfortable, hands moving subtly toward their positions, while Howard's production staff watched in fascination and horror at the spectacle unfolding before them. "You want to know what I think?" Howard continued, his voice rising to match Harry's intensity. "I think you're exactly like your father, weak, entitled, and completely out of touch with reality. The only difference is that Charles at least had the dignity to suffer in silence instead of turning his personal problems into a media circus." The mention of his father seemed to push Harry past his absolute breaking point. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment it looked like he might actually take a swing at the radio host. The security personnel tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, while everyone else in the studio held their breath. "Don't you ever," Harry seethed, his voice barely human now, "ever compare me to that man. You have no idea what you're talking about. None. You sit here in your little bubble judging people's lives like you're some kind of authority on human nature, but you're nothing. You're less than nothing." But Howard wasn't intimidated. If anything, Harry's loss of control only seemed to fuel his determination to push even harder. "I'm nothing. I'm not the one who abandoned his duty, turned his back on his family, and now spends his time whining about how hard his privileged life has been. At least I own what I am. You're still pretending to be some kind of humanitarian hero, when really you're just—" Howard paused dramatically, knowing that his next words would either end the interview or escalate it to a point of no return. The silence stretched out unbearably as Harry stood there trembling with rage, waiting for the final blow that would determine how this confrontation would end. "You're just a coward," Howard finally said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "A coward who couldn't handle the pressure of being royal. So you ran away to America and convinced yourself it was about principles. But we both know the truth, don't we, Harry? You didn't leave to protect your family or fight racism, or any of that noble crap you've been peddling. You left because being a working royal was hard, and you've never done anything hard in your entire life." The words hit their target with devastating precision. Harry's face went from red to white in an instant, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You don't know what you're talking about," he managed through gritted teeth, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. Howard had found the nerve he was looking for. "Oh, but I do," Howard pressed on, sensing victory. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. You want to know how I know? Because I've spent 40 years talking to people, reading people, understanding what makes them tick. And you, Harry, you're an open book. You're the guy who got everything handed to him and still couldn't cut it. So when things got tough, when the media got mean, when your wife faced the same scrutiny that every royal has faced for centuries, you tucked tail and ran." Harry's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. His composure completely shattered. "Stop," he whispered. But Howard was relentless now, sensing that he had his guest exactly where he wanted him. "You want to talk about your mother?" Howard continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. "Diana would be ashamed of what you've become. She faced the same media scrutiny, the same institutional pressure, and she stayed. She fought from within. She didn't abandon her duties and flee to California to make Netflix documentaries about how hard her life was." That was the breaking point. Harry exploded with a rage that seemed to surprise even himself. "How dare you?" he screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "How dare you invoke my mother's name? You didn't know her. You have no right to speak about what she would think." "I have every right," Howard shot back, matching Harry's volume. "This is my show, and I'll say whatever I want. And what I want to say is that your mother died fighting for causes she believed in, while you're living in a mansion complaining about how tough your life is." Harry took a step toward Howard's desk, his security detail immediately moving to intercept him. "You're disgusting," Harry snarled. "You're a disgusting human being who profits off of other people's pain. No wonder your audience is full of losers who have nothing better to do than listen to you tear people down." Howard laughed, but it was a harsh, ugly sound. "My audience? At least my audience doesn't pretend to care about me while I exploit my family's private moments for cash. At least they're honest about what they want. Unlike you, sitting there pretending this interview is beneath you when you're the one who came begging to be on my show to promote your latest cash grab." "I never begged to be anywhere near you," Harry spat. "This was a mistake. The biggest mistake I've made since moving to America." "Finally," Howard exclaimed, throwing his hands up in mock celebration. "Finally, some honesty. Yes, it was a mistake, Harry, but not for the reasons you think. It was a mistake because you thought you could come in here and control the narrative like you do with all those other softball interviews. You thought you could manipulate me the way you manipulate everyone else." Harry was now pacing behind his chair like a caged animal, his handlers trying desperately to get his attention. "You're delusional if you think this was manipulation," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "This was me trying to have a civilized conversation with someone I thought was a professional. Clearly, I was wrong." "Professional?" Howard scoffed. "Kid, I've been a professional longer than you've been alive. The difference is, I'm honest about what I do. I tear people down for entertainment, and I'm damn good at it. You, on the other hand, pretend to be some kind of humanitarian while you're really just another celebrity cashing in on your trauma." "That's it," Harry said suddenly, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm done. This interview is over." He started to remove his headphones, but Howard wasn't finished. "Oh no, you don't get to storm out and play the victim again," Howard called after him. "You came on my show. You answer my questions. That's how this works." Harry spun around, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made everyone in the studio take a step back. "I don't answer to you. I don't answer to anyone anymore. That's the whole point of leaving, which your tiny, bitter brain apparently can't comprehend." "Then why do you still use the title?" Howard demanded, standing up from his chair. "Why are you still trading on being the Duke of Sussex if you're so independent? Why don't you just be Harry Mountbatten Windsor, private citizen, instead of milking your royal connection for every dollar it's worth?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, Harry seemed genuinely stumped. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable by the second. "That's what I thought," Howard said with satisfaction. "You can't give it up because without that title, you're nothing. Without being a prince, you're just another sealless celebrity with daddy issues and a podcast nobody listens to." Something in Harry finally snapped completely. He ripped off his headphones and hurled them across the studio where they crashed into the wall with a loud bang. "You're sick," he screamed. "You're actually sick. I feel sorry for anyone who has to be around you." "Feel sorry for yourself," Howard shot back. "You're the one who's going to have to live with being a disappointment to everyone who ever believed in you." Harry stood there for a moment, chest heaving, looking like he was deciding whether to say something else or just leave. Finally, he seemed to make his choice. You know what, Howard? You win. You got what you wanted. You turned this into a circus, and now you can play the clips and make money off of humiliating me. Congratulations. But Howard wasn't satisfied with that ending. Don't you dare try to make this about me exploiting you. You came here knowing exactly what kind of show this is. You thought you could handle it, and you couldn't. That's on you, not me. Everything is on me, apparently, Harry said bitterly. My mother's death, my wife's mental health struggles, my family's dysfunction, the media's treatment of us, according to you. It's all my fault for not just shutting up and taking it. Now you're getting it, Howard said with a cruel smile. Finally, some self-awareness. Harry stared at him for a long moment. And when he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but filled with genuine disgust. I actually pity you. I pity anyone who thinks this is what success looks like. Sitting in a studio, tearing people down, making money off of cruelty. What a sad, empty way to live. With that, Harry turned and walked toward the studio door, his security detail and handlers scrambling to follow him. Howard called after him one last time. Hey Harry, thanks for proving my point about everything. Don't let the door hit you on your way back to irrelevance. Harry paused at the door, his hand on the handle. And for a moment, it looked like he might turn around and say something else. Instead, he simply shook his head and walked out, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence and the wreckage of what had started as a simple interview promotion. Howard sat back down in his chair, a satisfied smirk on his face as he looked around at his shell-shocked staff. Well, he said into his microphone, I think that went pretty well. What do you think, Robin? Robin Quivers, who had remained largely silent during the entire confrontation, could only manage a week. Oh my God. Howard, ladies and gentlemen, Howard announced to his listening audience. Prince Harry has just left the building. And I think we all learned something important today about what happens when entitled celebrities think they can come in here and control the conversation. Spoiler alert, they can't. The interview was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. As Harry's SUV pulled away from the Sirius XM building, the audio of the confrontation was already being uploaded, ready to be dissected, analyzed, and replayed millions of times across social media. Howard had gotten exactly what he wanted, a viral moment that would be talked about for years. And Harry had learned the hard way that some battles are impossible to win, especially when you're fighting on someone else's turf.